It stretched so far in both directions that the far walls were lost in shadow. The ceiling rose high above like the inside of a mountain, carved from black stone that caught the light and threw it back in sharp angles. Hundreds of Sorath nobles stood in rows, tall and proud, their skin a deep silver blue, their eyes like polished amber. They wore armor even at ceremonies because, to the Sorath, showing strength was the same as breathing. You did it without thinking. You did it always. At the far end of the hall, on a throne built from the bones of conquered warships, sat Queen Vial. She was tall even by Sorath standards. Her crown was not gold or jewels. It was a ring of dark metal, shaped from the hull of the first enemy ship she had ever destroyed herself. Her face was sharp and still, like a statue that had learned to breathe. She did not smile. She did not need to. Every person in that room already feared her, and she had long stopped caring about anything less than fear. Today, however, there was something different beside her throne. A man, a human man. He stood one step below the throne platform, which was already a statement. He was not tall. He was not wide. He had dark hair, cut simply, and a plain face that would be easy to forget in a crowd. He wore the formal attire of the Human Confederation, a dark-fitted suit with a single small emblem on the chest. No weapons, no armor. It's no decorations of war. His name was Kang. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back and looked out at the hall with calm, quiet eyes. He did not fidget. He did not sweat. He looked to anyone watching, like a man waiting for a bus. The ceremony began. Queen Vael rose from her throne, and the entire hall went silent immediately, the way silence falls when something powerful moves. She spoke in the Sorath tongue, her voice deep and even, filling the space without effort. Because she spoke of the peace treaty, she spoke of the new era, she spoke of the Human Confederation's agreement to stand beneath the Sorath Empire's authority, not as enemies, but as the lesser party in a negotiated order. And then she gestured to Kang. She called him her chosen consort, her mate by the terms of the political alliance, a symbol, she said, of the new relationship between species. To a human beside a Sorath queen, proof that the Empire was generous enough to offer such closeness to a lesser race. The hall did not applaud. The Sorath did not applaud. They struck their fists once against their chest plates, a single sharp sound that meant acknowledgement. It was the same sound they made when told the weather. Kang heard it all. He kept his eyes forward and said nothing. In the third row of nobles, Admiral Tova leaned toward the lord beside her. Sir Tova was broad-shouldered even for a Sorath, with a scar running from her left eye to her jaw that she had never had treated because she liked the way it made younger soldiers look away. She was the most decorated military commander in the Empire, and she had very little patience for ceremonies that did not involve actual warfare. She has brought a pet, Tova said, her voice just low enough to be heard by those nearby, but not low enough to be private. With several nobles around her pressed their lips together to hold back laughter. One did not bother holding it back at all. Kang heard that too. He did not turn his head. After the ceremony, the court moved into the reception hall for the formal dinner. Kang walked beside Vael through the crowds. Nobles parted for the queen and glanced at him the way one glances at furniture, briefly without real interest, then away. A few of the younger Sorath stared longer, curious the way children are curious about something they have never seen up close before. One of them, a lord barely past his military training, leaned over to his companion and whispered something that made them both laugh. Kang caught 2 words of it. He filed them away. At dinner, Vael did not speak to him for the first hour. When she finally did, it was not a question. It was a list of rules, delivered in flat, precise Confederation standard, so he would understand every word. He was to attend all formal events. He was to stand where he was placed. He was to speak only when spoken to by her directly, and even then, only briefly. He was not to involve himself in politics, in military discussions, in trade negotiations, or in any matter of imperial governance. He was to cause no disruption, create no alliances of his own, and make no contact with the human embassy without her office being informed first. She finished and looked at him the way someone looks at a wall they have just given instructions to. Kang looked back at her. His expression did not change. "Understood," he said. Vael blinked. Just once. She had expected more. Pushback, perhaps. Wounded pride. Something human. She had read that humans were emotional, quick to anger, difficult to manage. The reports had warned her to expect trouble. What she got was a man who said one word and then reached for his glass of water. She turned back to her nobles and did not look at him again for the rest of the evening. Far from the hall, in a small room in the Human Confederation embassy on the edge of the capital city, a woman named Yuna sat in front of a screen. She had been watching the ceremony feed for the past 2 hours. She was not a soldier. She was a diplomatic attaché, which meant her job was to watch, understand, and report. She was very good at her job. She watched Kang stand at the bottom of that throne step. She watched the nobles laugh. She watched Tova's mouth move and saw the ripple of amusement move through the crowd. She watched Kang's face stay perfectly, completely still. Yuna had known Kang since they were children, growing up in the same district on Earth. She had watched him grow up. She had watched him train. She had watched him disappear into the Confederation's Black Ops division for 11 years. And she had watched him come back from it quieter than he went in, which said more than any report ever could. She knew what that stillness meant. It did not mean he was harmless. It meant he was paying attention. She reached over and picked up her datapad. She opened a secure channel to a contact listed simply as D. Admiral Day, Kang's older brother, currently commanding the 3rd Confederation Fleet at the outer border. She typed 3 words. Watch the feeds. Then she put the datapad down, looked back at the screen, and watched Kang calmly drink his water while a hall full of aliens laughed at him. She did not feel sorry for him. She felt sorry for them. That night, in his assigned quarters deep in the palace, Kang sat at the small desk they had given him. The room was large by any standard. The Sorath did not do things small, but it was bare. A bed, a desk, a window that looked out over the capital city's lights. He opened a plain notebook. Not a datapad, a real paper notebook. Because paper did not transmit signals and could not be remotely accessed. He wrote one line at the top of the first page. Day 1. Begin. Then he turned to the window and looked out at the city for a long time, memorizing the layout, the lights, the movement patterns, the guard rotations he had already counted twice during the walk from the hall. He was not angry. He was not hurt. He was working. And he had been working since the moment he walked through the doors of that hall and felt 1,000 alien eyes look at him and see nothing worth worrying about. That was, he knew from long experience, exactly the right place to start. 3 weeks passed. Kang learned the palace the way water learns a riverbed, slowly, quietly, finding every low point and every crack without announcing itself. Well, he walked the same corridors at different hours and counted how long it took guards to change their posts. He sat in the background of council meetings he was technically allowed to attend as consort and said nothing while listening to everything. He memorized names, ranks, old grudges, new alliances, and the small patterns that told a careful observer who actually held power in a room versus who simply held a title. The Sorath court, for its part, had mostly forgotten he existed, and that suited him perfectly. He had developed a simple daily rhythm that no one questioned. He rose early before most of the palace stirred. He walked the gardens, always the same path, always at the same unhurried pace. He attended whatever events were required of him, stood where he was placed, and said as little as possible. He ate his meals quietly. He returned to his quarters and wrote in his notebook until late. The nobles had gone from laughing at him to simply not thinking about him. He was the queen's human, a curiosity that had already grown boring. Some of the younger staff treated him with careful politeness, the kind used for something fragile that the queen might notice if broken. Some of the older guards ignored him entirely. Tova, on the rare occasions she passed him in the hall, looked through him the way one looks through glass. He noticed all of it. He wrote all of it down. What he had mapped in 3 weeks would have taken a Confederation intelligence team 3 months and a network of paid informants. Val noticed none of this. Or if she noticed, she did not care. She had adjusted to his presence the way one adjusts to a piece of furniture that has been moved slightly. A brief awareness, then nothing. He attended dinners. He stood beside her at ceremonies. He never caused problems. She had, in a way, gotten exactly what she wanted. a human consort who was invisible. The irritation came in smaller ways. She had mentioned once, in passing during a morning briefing, that her personal tea had been arriving cold lately. The kitchen staff had been informed 3 times. Nothing had changed. It was a minor thing, beneath her to pursue further. But it was an annoyance, and Vile did not enjoy annoyances. The next morning the tea arrived hot. She said nothing about it, but she noticed. 2 days later, during a formal reception, she had been struggling to place the name of a minor lord from the eastern provinces. A man she had met once 3 years ago, whose family controlled a trade route she was currently negotiating over. The name sat just out of reach, and searching for it in the middle of a conversation was not something a queen could be seen doing. Kang appeared at her left side, close enough only to be heard by her, and said the name quietly, Otron, with the trade route and the family's primary export included in one short sentence. Then he stepped back and said nothing else. She finished the conversation smoothly. Later, when the reception had ended and they were walking back through the corridor, she glanced at him once. He was looking at the floor ahead, hands behind his back, expression calm. She did not thank him, but she did not forget it either. The council members, for their part, treated Kang the way they treated all political attachments of foreign dignitaries, with formal courtesy and complete indifference to his actual thoughts. He was decoration. He was there to symbolize an agreement, not to participate in it. This changed on a Tuesday. The eastern provinces had been sitting on an unresolved land management dispute for 4 months. 3 different council departments had written reports about it. 2 sub-councils had held hearings. Either the dispute involved water rights, a mining claim, and a 200-year-old treaty clause that 3 separate legal teams had interpreted in 3 separate ways. It had become the kind of problem that grew larger every time someone tried to address it, and the council had quietly decided to let it sit a little longer till someone else solved it. Kang slid a single sheet of paper under the door of the relevant council minister that morning. On it was a clear, simple resolution. It did not favor either disputing party. It found a third interpretation of the old treaty clause, one that technically satisfied both claims by redefining the contested boundary as a shared administrative zone rather than a divided one. It was 2 paragraphs long. It cited 4 existing laws and 1 ancient precedent. It required no new legislation and no additional hearings. The minister stared at it for a while. Then he brought it to the sub-council. The sub-council stared at it for a while. Then they implemented it because it was correct and they could find nothing wrong with it. At the next council meeting, someone mentioned that the eastern dispute had been resolved. Val asked who had resolved it. There was a pause. The minister cleared his throat. The human consort submitted a written resolution, he said with the careful tone of someone reporting something mildly baffling. It was found to be legally sound. The room was quiet for a moment. Ivale looked across the table to where Kang sat in his usual place. Slightly back from the main table, as was proper for his position, he was looking at his own folded hands. How did you resolve it? Vile asked. Kang looked up. I read the old report, he said. The answer was already there. No one laughed this time, but no one spoke either. The silence had a different quality to it, not mockery, in something closer to the feeling a person gets when they realize they have been walking past something valuable for months without seeing it. Tova, sitting at the far end of the table, looked at Kang for 3 full seconds. Then she looked away. In the evenings, Kang met with Rin. Rin was a small, quiet man, a human translator attached to the diplomatic mission, officially there to assist with Confederation language needs. In truth, Rin was one of the sharpest field analysts the Confederation had placed in the court, and he had been there for 2 years before Kang arrived. They communicated in short meetings that looked, to anyone watching, like a consort checking in with a staff member. One evening, Rin passed him a small folded paper. Kang read it. It was short, 3 lines. It described an anomaly in shipping movement reports from the eastern frontier, a region beyond Sorath space, in the direction of what most charts labeled as unclaimed territory, supply ships moving in patterns that didn't match trade routes, communication signals in a frequency the Sorath military used for deep space reconnaissance, but that no active Sorath mission was currently assigned to that region. Kang folded the paper once, then again. He looked at Rin. How long, he asked. 6 weeks at minimum, Rin said. Could be more. Could already be more. Kang nodded slowly, though he put the paper in his jacket pocket and stood up. "Keep watching," he said. He walked back to his quarters and opened his notebook. He sat for a long time without writing. He looked out the window at the city lights, the way he had on the first night. But his eyes were not on the city this time. They were on the dark sky above it, past the glow, where the stars sat cold and far away. Something was moving out there. Something that the Sorath, in all their pride and power, where I had not yet looked up to see. He picked up his pen. He turned to a new page, and he began, quietly and carefully, to prepare. The gala was the largest event Kang had attended since the ceremony. It was held in the Empire's great commemoration hall, a room so old that parts of its floor were worn smooth by centuries of Sorath boots. The walls were lined with carved stone records of every major conquest the Empire had ever made. When names of defeated civilizations ran in long columns from floor to ceiling, each one marked with the date it fell and the name of the Sorath commander who had broken it. It was the kind of room designed to make visitors feel very small. The gala celebrated the anniversary of the Empire's greatest recorded victory, a campaign 300 years ago in which the Sorath had defeated a rival power twice their size through sheer military force and ended the war in under a year. It was their favorite story. They told it every year. Kang stood beside Val in his dark formal suit and listened to the speeches and looked at the carved names on the walls. He counted them. There were over 200 civilizations listed. He did not look away. The hall was full. Generals and admirals in heavy ceremonial armor. Noble families who had funded campaigns. Political figures who had signed the treaties that followed wars. All of them tall, silver blue, amber-eyed, filling the room with the low, constant sound of Sorath conversation. Formal, sharp, measured, like a room full of people who considered even small talk a form of competition. Kang moved through it all quietly, as he always did. He accepted a drink when a server offered one. He nodded when nobles acknowledged him, which was rare. He listened more than he spoke, which meant he almost never spoke at all. At the main dinner table, he was seated at Vael's right. The general sat across from him. Sutova was 3 seats down, currently in a loud, detailed argument with another admiral about the correct firing formation for a close-range assault. She had not acknowledged Kang's presence. The dinner moved through its courses. Conversations rose and fell. At one point, a general named Vor, heavy-built, red-sashed, with the look of a man who had won many battles and never stopped thinking about them, turned to Kang with the loose attention of someone who had been drinking. "Human," Vor said, without bothering to use his name. "Tell me something. What is the greatest military achievement of your people?" It was not a genuine question. It was the kind of question asked across a dinner table when the asker already knows the answer they think is correct and wants to watch the other person struggle to match it. Several nobles nearby turned to listen. Kang set his glass down. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone searching for an answer. The quiet of someone choosing which answer to give. "It wasn't a battle," Kang said. Vor raised an eyebrow. "No? It was surviving long enough to fight the next one," Kang said. "Humans have been nearly wiped out 6 times in our recorded history. Disease, war, environmental collapse, resource failure. Each time most of us died. Each time some of us didn't. And the ones who didn't go back to building." He picked up his glass again. "That's the achievement. Not any single battle. Yuck, the refusal to stop." The table was quiet for a moment. Vor looked at him with the expression of a man who had asked a simple question and received something he had not planned for. He made a short sound that might have been acknowledgement and turned back to his own plate. Tova, 3 seats down, had stopped talking. She was looking at Kang. He did not look back. Later, as the dinner wound down and the hall filled with the quieter sound of private conversations, as a younger lord approached Kang near the edge of the room. He was curious rather than mocking, young enough that his arrogance had not yet fully hardened into contempt. "You said you worked for the Confederation," the lord said. "What did you do?" "Various things," Kang said. "What kind of things?" Kang considered the question. "I was in a division called Strategic Adaptive Response," he said. The lord's expression showed that the name meant nothing to him. What is that?" "It doesn't officially exist anymore," Kang said pleasantly. "So I couldn't really say." He smiled once, excused himself, and moved away. What Kang had not said, what he had not said to anyone in the palace, had not written in any document that could be found, had barely thought about in direct terms himself, was the truth of those 11 years. Strategic Adaptive Response had been a small division. It never had more than 40 active agents at any one time. It did not appear in the Confederation's official military records. Its budget was hidden inside 3 other departments' accounts. Its agents did not carry standard-issue weapons or wear identifiable uniforms or operate in teams larger than 2. What they did was this. They were sent into hostile environments, enemy governments, alien political courts, occupied territories, criminal networks, with minimal support and no extraction guarantee. Their job was not to fight. Fighting was loud and expensive and left evidence. Their job was to understand a system completely and then, using only what was already inside that system, make it stop working. Not destroy it, not bomb it. Make it stop working from the inside, quietly using its own weight against itself. The best agents were never the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who could sit in a room full of enemies, be completely ignored, and use that invisibility to learn every pressure point the room contained. Kang had been the best agent the division ever produced. He had been deployed 6 times in 11 years. He had never once fired a weapon in the field, not because he couldn't, because he had never needed to. He had retired 3 years ago. He had told himself he was done with it. He had taken a quiet position in the Confederation's diplomatic corps, which was where Yuna worked. And when she had looked at him when he arrived and said nothing for a long time before finally saying, "You look tired." He had said he was fine. She had looked at him the way she always looked at him when he said things she didn't believe, and then let it go. When the Confederation had asked him, quietly, carefully, using the word asked in the way that made clear it was not really a question, to serve as consort to the Sarath Queen as part of the alliance agreement, he had sat with it for 2 days. Then he had said yes, not for the Confederation, not for politics. For a simpler reason that he had trouble putting into clean language, but that settled in his chest with the weight of something true. If someone was going to be placed in that court, in that position, with all that access and all that danger, it should be someone who knew what to do with it. He knew what to do with it. Or the problem, the thing that Rin's note had made sharper and more urgent, was that he was beginning to understand he had not been placed here for the peace at all. He had been placed here for what was coming after it. He sat in his quarters that night and opened his notebook to the page he had started after Rin's report. He had a rough shape now, movement patterns, historical records of a civilization the Sorath called extinct, the Vel'Karath, that showed, when you read the old data carefully, that they had not been extinct for quite as long as everyone believed. He had 3 weeks of preparation done. He did not know how much time he had left. He hoped it was enough. He turned to the next clean page and kept working. The attack came on a morning when the sky over Vilos Prime was clear and pale gold. Kang was already awake, already at his desk, already 3 pages deep into a revised version of the plan he had been building for weeks. When the palace alarms began. Not the slow, formal alarms of a drill, the sharp, climbing wail of something real. He closed his notebook, stood, and walked to his window. The city below was beginning to move in the jagged, disorganized way cities move when they have just received bad news. He had been expecting this. He had not been expecting it quite this soon. By the time he reached the council chamber, the room was already in chaos. Reports were coming in from the eastern frontier in a flood that the analysts could barely keep up with. 3 Sorath border fleets had been hit in simultaneous strikes, coordinated, precise, using attack vectors that bypassed the standard defense grids entirely. 1 fleet was destroyed, 1 had lost communications, the 3rd was retreating but badly damaged. The strikes had come from deep space, from a direction that sat right where Rin's shipping anomaly reports had been pointing for weeks. In the Vel'Karath, the council members were on their feet, all talking at once, pulling up maps and fleet positions and casualty estimates. The noise was enormous. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had an order they wanted to give. Vial sat at the head of the table with her face composed and still, but her hands were flat on the table surface. which Kang had learned in the past weeks was the only visible sign she gave of real tension. Tova was already projecting fleet repositioning plans on the central screen, her voice loud and certain above the noise. Kang stood at the edge of the room. He looked at the map. He looked at the attack vectors. He looked at the timing data. He looked at the direction the Vel'Karath ships had come from and the direction they were moving now. And the shape of it confirmed what his 3 weeks of preparation had already told him. This was not the whole attack. This was the first move. They were testing response time, measuring how fast the Sorath could reorganize. The real push would come in 72 hours, maybe less, when the Empire was still reacting to the first strike. He raised his hand. The room did not immediately quiet. He kept his hand up. A few council members noticed and went still, then a few more. The noise dropped enough that Vial noticed the change and followed it to its source. She looked at Kang. "I have a tactical analysis," Kang said. "I would like to present it." The room was not fully quiet. Some members had kept talking, but Vial gave a short nod because even now, even in crisis, she maintained form. "Speak," she said. Kang walked to the front of the room. He did not use the central screen. He did not have access to it. He used the plain wall map and a light pointer from the table. He spoke clearly and without rushing, the way someone speaks when they need to be understood on the first try. He explained the shipping anomalies from 6 weeks ago. He explained the movement patterns and what they meant about Vel'Karath staging positions. He explained why this strike had hit 3 specific fleets, not the strongest ones, but the ones whose loss would create the largest gaps in the defense grid. He explained what the Vel'Karath's next move would likely be, where they would hit, and when. He laid out a counter-positioning strategy, which fleets needed to move now, which defense stations needed to be brought online, and one specific narrow window in the eastern approach where, if a blocking force was correctly placed in the next 18 hours, the Vel'Karath's second strike would hit a wall instead of open space. It took him 11 minutes. When he finished, the room was quiet. Not the respectful quiet of people who had been persuaded. A different kind of quiet. The uncertain kind. Not the kind that exists in the gap between something that makes sense and something that people have not yet decided they are willing to believe. Then Tova laughed. It was a short, hard sound, like a door slamming. She shook her head and looked at the other council members with the expression of someone who has just been asked to take a children's drawing seriously in a professional meeting. "Fleet repositioning based on 6-week-old shipping reports," she said. "Sawyer predicted attack windows based on patterns this human identified from outside any active intelligence network." She spread her hands. "He has read some old files and drawn some lines on a map. We are in the middle of an active assault. We do not have time for this." Some council members were already nodding. Others looked at the map, and then at Tova, and then at the floor. Val had not spoken. She was looking at the map. Something in her face was working, a small, careful motion behind her eyes that Kang had learned to watch for. It meant she was thinking, not just reacting. He had seen it when she resolved the Eastern Province situation. He had seen it when she listened to fleet reports late at night when she thought the room was empty. He waited. She looked at him. Then she looked at the council. Then something shifted in her face and closed, the way a door closes, and Kang understood in that moment that she was not going to back him. Not here. Not in front of the full council with the Empire bleeding on the eastern frontier and every senior general and admiral watching her for a sign of strength. She stood. The room went immediately and completely silent. "The Confederation has sent me a political symbol," she said, and her voice was clear and even and filled the room without effort. She looked at Kang, and her eyes were not cruel. They were simply final, the way a judge's face is final when the decision has been made. "I did not ask my pet for battlefield advice." The room broke. Not all of them laughed. Some kept their faces careful and blank. But enough of them laughed. A ripple that moved through the chamber the way a stone dropped in water moves, spreading out and out, that the sound of it filled the space completely. Tova did not bother hiding her smile. Kang stood at the front of the room. He did not move. He did not look at the floor. He looked at Vial for 3 seconds, then at the map. Then he set the light pointer down on the table. He picked up his notebook, which he had brought with him and which no one had noticed. He tucked it under his arm. He walked to the door. No one stopped him. Most of them were already looking away, already back to the map and Tova's repositioning plan and the crisis at hand. He stepped out of the chamber. The door closed behind him. The corridor was quiet. He stood in it for a moment and breathed once, slowly. He was not shaking. He was not angry in the hot, immediate way that makes people do stupid things. He was angry in the other way. The cold, clean way that settles deep and stays still and does not move until it is useful. He started walking, not back to his quarters, in a different direction. In the human embassy across the city, Yuna had been watching the council session on a live feed, one of several information streams she maintained through diplomatic channels. She had watched Kang's presentation. She had watched Tova's response. She had watched Viel stand and speak. She had heard every word. She sat for a long moment after Kang left the chamber. Then she picked up her secure communicator and opened the channel to Admiral Day. It rang twice. "I saw it," Day said before she could speak. His voice was flat and tight in the way voices get when someone is working hard to stay controlled. "He's not standing down," Yuna said. A pause. "No," Day said. "He wouldn't." Another pause. Longer. "Get me his current position." Yuna was already pulling it up. She found him on the palace's internal tracking system, the one she had quiet access to through a back channel she had established in her first month on Valus Prime. She watched his indicator moving through the palace corridors at a steady, unhurried pace. Not toward his quarters, toward the secondary communications wing. "He's already moving," she said. On the other end of the line, she heard Day exhale slowly, and then the sound of him giving orders to someone off-channel, then his voice, back to her, calm and certain. "Then so are we," he said. Tova's plan failed in 31 hours. The fleet repositioning she had ordered moved strength to the wrong sectors. Exactly the sectors the Vel'Korath had intended her to protect, because protecting them left the real approach open. The Vel'Korath did not hit where Tova expected. They hit where Kang had said they would. Three more systems fell dark in quick succession, communication links severed, defensive platforms knocked offline with a precision that felt almost casual. The trapped Ninth Fleet, caught between two Vel'Korath wings with no room to maneuver, sent out a distress signal and then went silent. The council chamber, when Vale called the emergency session, was a different room than it had been 24 hours earlier. The loud certainty was gone. In its place was the tight, shallow quality of people who are beginning to be afraid and do not know how to carry it. Tova stood at the front of the room and did not meet anyone's eyes. Viel listened to the reports. She did not speak for a long time. She sat very still in her chair, her hands flat on the table again, and looked at the map where the losses were marked in red. No one mentioned Kang's name, but the shape of his absent plan sat in the room like a missing tooth, the specific empty space where something should have been. Kang was in the secondary communications wing. It was a part of the palace that handled non-military administrative transmissions, trade agreements, interprovincial correspondence, diplomatic messaging. It was not restricted, which was why it had been easy to access. It was also the only communication system in the palace that routed through a relay point he had quietly identified 6 weeks ago as lying outside the standard Imperial monitoring protocols. Not invisible, just less watched. He had been working for 9 hours. He had not slept. He had Rin with him, both of them in a small side room, the door closed, a single lamp on the desk. Rin worked the technical side. Kang worked the strategic side. They did not talk much because they had both learned, in their different ways, that unnecessary conversation was weight. Kang had activated things he had been quietly preparing for weeks. Not weapons, not agents, relationships. 3 months of careful attention had given him something the Sorath court had not noticed him building. Trust with the right people in the right places, not political alliances, not formal agreements. Something smaller and more durable. The kind of trust that comes from a man who remembered your name when no one else did. Punan, who solved your problem quietly when you needed it solved, who asked nothing in return and appeared to have no agenda. The lord from the eastern provinces, whose land dispute Kang had resolved, had a cousin who commanded a communication relay station on the frontier. Kang had spoken to the lord twice since then. Briefly, politely, about nothing of consequence. He had remembered his cousin's name, which the Lord had mentioned once in passing. He had asked about her work with the specific, unhurried interest of someone who found it genuinely interesting. He reached out to her now, not through the military channel, through a personal frequency that her cousin had shared with Kang informally, as one shares such thing when one likes a person. Her name was Seva. She was sharp and underfunded and had been trying for 8 months to get a fleet maintenance order approved through official channels. Kang had already drafted the approval paperwork 3 weeks ago. Not submitted it, she just prepared it, because he had seen the request buried in a provincial report and understood that it was the kind of thing that got lost in bureaucratic weight and that someone with the right access could fix in an afternoon. He sent her the approved maintenance order along with his message. Then he explained the situation. She read both things. There was a pause. Then her response came back. Short, professional, and yes. The Ninth Fleet's commander was a Sorath officer named General Ova. Would Kang had never met her. He had read her service record twice. She was not brilliant in the showy, aggressive way of generals like Tova. She was methodical, careful, and in the 15 years of her career, had never once abandoned a retreating ally force. She had also never received a formal commendation, because the battles she was known for were the ones where losses were minimal, and minimal losses were rarely the kind of story that got carved into walls. Kang had written her profile in his notebook on day 19 of his time in the palace. After reading 3 years of her mission reports in the open archive section of the Imperial Library, which anyone with a consort's access badge could enter. He reached her through Seva's relay station. The connection was rough and broken by interference, but it held. Kang introduced himself. He told her who he was, not his title, not his role, but what he had actually done before he came to the palace. And he said it plainly, without softening it or over-explaining it. He said he had a route out for her fleet and that it required executing a specific maneuver that was going to look wrong until it was right. General Ova listened without interrupting. Then she asked one question. Why are you doing this without authorization? Because the authorization process takes time your fleet doesn't have, Kang said. And because I'm right. A pause. You're very certain, she said. Yes, he said. I am. Another pause, longer. Walk me through it, she said. He did, step by step, calm and clear, the same voice he would have used to explain something to a colleague over lunch. He told her exactly where to move, how fast, using which approach vector and why that specific vector worked given the Vel-Karath wing positioning he had mapped. He told her about the gap, a narrow corridor between two advancing enemy formations that looked like a dead end on a standard grid, but opened into clear space if you entered it at the right angle at the right speed. She listened. She asked 3 questions. He answered all 3. Then she said, executing. Kang set down the communicator and leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Rin was watching him. It's going to work, Rin said. It was not a question. Or he knew Kang well enough to know the difference between a plan that Kang thought might work and a plan that Kang knew would work. This had always been the second kind. Yes, Kang said. And the second part? Kang picked up the communicator again. He opened a different channel, the one he had prepared even before Rin's first report, because there were contingencies he had built into his first week that he had never told Rin about, because some preparations were better kept simple and separate. The channel rang. Admiral Day answered immediately. Position? Kang asked. Outer boundary, Day said. Holding as discussed. 3 ships, non-aggressive formation. Move to the secondary approach point, Kang said. Arrival window is in 4 hours. I'll have the corridor clean by then. Understood. A pause. Are you all right? Kang thought about it. It was a real question, not a polite one, and Day deserved a real answer. I'm working, he said. Good enough, Dai said. And the channel closed. The Ninth Fleet emerged from the corridor 4 hours and 12 minutes later. Not destroyed, not captured. Moving fast and in formation, with 60% of its ships intact and all crew accounted for. A number that should, by every calculation Tova's staff had run, have been 0. In the council chamber, someone pulled up the sensor readout and stared at it. Then they pulled it up again, as if the second viewing might produce a different result. It did not. General Ova's fleet was alive, and behind them at the outer boundary, 3 Confederation vessels had entered Sorath space in a precise, quiet formation. No weapons active, no aggressive signals, moving to a defensive position that covered the Ninth Fleet's rear without crossing into contested territory. Nobody in the council chamber had authorized them to be there. Nobody in the council chamber had known they were coming. Val stood up slowly. She looked at the screen. And then she turned and looked at the door of the council chamber, as if Kang might be standing in it. He was not. She turned to a guard. "Find him," she said. Her voice was still even, still controlled. But the quality of it had changed in a way that the guard, who had served her for 12 years, had only heard 2 or 3 times before. She sounded very quietly, like someone who had just made a mistake and knew exactly how large it was. The Vel Karath commanders were not stupid. Here, they had watched the Ninth Fleet escape. They had tracked the Confederation ships arriving at the outer boundary. They had run their own analysis and arrived quickly at the conclusion that their tactical model had been compromised, that someone inside the Sorath Palace had understood their strategy and moved against it quietly and without the kind of noise that should have been detectable. They spent 6 hours trying to figure out who had done it. Then they decided it did not matter. What mattered was that the Sorath Empire was already damaged, and the momentum of the campaign was still theirs. They had broken 3 fleets. They had taken 4 systems. The path to Velos Prime, the capital world, the heart of the Empire, was not open, but it was closer to open than it had ever been in 3 centuries. If they committed everything they had in a direct assault on the capital, the shock of it alone might be enough to shatter Sorath morale and end the war before the Empire could stabilize. They committed their flagship fleet. It appeared on Sorath, sensors like a fist. Kang was in the secondary command room when the alert came through. The guard Viel had sent had found him 40 minutes after the Ninth Fleet emerged. By then, Kang had already moved from the communications wing to a lower-level monitoring room, a functional, unglamorous space with 4 screens, a direct link to the palace's sensor network, and a single chair that he had pulled to the center of the room. It was not the main command center. The main command center had Tova in it and 100 people who still didn't know what to do with him. This room had Rin and 2 palace technical staff who had come with the guard and who stood near the door, looking uncertain about what they were supposed to do. Kang told them their names. He had learned every staff member's name in the first 2 weeks, and told them calmly what he needed from each of them. They looked at each other briefly. Then they sat down and started doing it. When the Vel Karath flagship fleet arrived on the sensors, Kang was already looking at the screen. He opened his notebook to the last page of new writing. He had prepared for this too. Not exactly this. And he had not known the flagship fleet would commit to a direct assault on the capital. He had prepared for 3 possible next moves, and this was the most extreme of them. The preparation for it was also the most complex. He had not expected to need it. He was going to need it. He opened the channel to Admiral Day. "Flagship fleet," Kang said, "moving toward the capital. I need you at the secondary grid point, northern approach, out in 90 minutes. Distance is wrong for 90 minutes, D said immediately. "Push it," Kang said. A short silence. "We'll be at 92. "Fine." Kang turned to one of the technical staff. "I need direct communication to all active Sorath defense platforms in the inner ring. Not through the main command center, through this terminal." The staff member hesitated. "I don't have the clearance to—" "Queen Viel authorized my access," Kang said. He said it clearly and without stress, because it was true. It had been authorized on the day of his arrival as consort, a blanket diplomatic access level that no one had ever imagined he would use. "Please open the channel." The staff member opened it. Kang looked at the sensor screen. The Vel Karath flagship fleet was enormous. 23 ships, heavy class, moving in a tight wedge formation toward the capital. The Sorath defense grid around Velos Prime was designed for exactly this situation. But 3 of its key platforms had been repositioned by Tova's earlier orders, which meant the coverage had gaps. Not large gaps, but large enough. He began working. He had 11 defense platforms, Day's 3 ships, the battered but functional Ninth Fleet that General Ova was currently holding at the inner boundary, and a network of automated relay stations that were not weapons platforms, but could be made into something almost as useful with the right signal configuration. He had the sensor network, the communication lines, and everything he had observed and memorized and prepared for weeks. He did not have enough. He knew he did not have enough on paper, but he had something that the Vel Karath did not have. They were fighting a grid they had modeled before the Ninth Fleet escaped. They did not yet know that Ova's fleet was intact. They had planned for an inner defense that was weaker than the one they were about to find. Kang spoke steadily and without stopping for the next 47 minutes. He gave platform commanders their new positioning. He gave Ova her approach angle. He arranged the relay stations in a pattern that, from a Vel Karath sensor reading, would suggest a weapon array that did not exist. A ghost grid, built from false signals and careful timing, that would push the enemy formation slightly off its intended course and into a gap where 3 real platforms could do maximum damage. He told each person exactly what they were doing and why in clear terms, and the specificity of it. The fact that every instruction came with a reason made people respond in the way people respond when they trust what they're being told. He was calm throughout all of it. His voice never rose. His hands were steady. He drank water when Rin put a glass near him. He did not look up from the screen except to write one line in his notebook between instructions, so he would not lose his place. Gaviel walked into the room 45 minutes into it. She came without announcement. The guard had told her where Kang was, and she had come herself without her counsel and without her advisors. She stood in the doorway of the small, ugly room and looked at the screens and at Kang and at the 2 technical staff at their terminals. Kang glanced up at her. 3 minutes, he said quietly. Not rudely, just honestly. She said nothing. She watched. And the Vel Karath flagship fleet entered the inner defense zone and hit the ghost grid. The lead ships adjusted course as their targeting systems tried to identify weapon signatures that weren't there. The adjustment was small, 19 degrees, but it moved them directly across the firing path of 2 repositioned platforms and the gap where Ova's fleet was waiting in low-power silence. The Ninth Fleet came alive. The 3 platforms fired in the same second. The lead Vel Karath ships took the hits head-on. 2 of the 23 were destroyed immediately. 4 more were disabled. The wedge formation broke apart as the commanders tried to reassess. In the confusion, dazed 3 Confederation ships arrived at the northern approach, slightly late, 92 minutes exactly, and sealed the retreat path with weapons hot. The Vel Karath flagship itself, the largest ship in the fleet, with the one that carried the campaign's central command, was caught between Ova's fleet and Day's blockade. It had nowhere to go that was not covered. Its captain made the calculation that most captains make when the math is clear. It stopped firing. It broadcast a formal signal, the universal pattern that meant, we are ending engagement. Kang looked at the screen for a moment. Then he set down his pen. He looked at the data once more, confirmed what he was seeing, and let out a slow, controlled breath. Behind him, Viel had not moved from the doorway. The 2 technical staff were staring at their screens with the slightly dazed look of people who have just watched something they are not sure they fully processed. Rin was leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed, which was the closest he ever came to showing relief. The room was quiet. Kang turned around. He looked at Viel. She looked at him. Her face was composed. It was always composed. But the quality of her stillness was different from usual. It was not the stillness of someone in control. It was the stillness of someone standing very carefully because they are not sure what would happen if they moved quickly. He waited. She was the queen. She would speak first or she would not. She looked at the screen, then back at him. How long, she said. Her voice was quiet, not soft. Val's voice was never soft, but quiet. Aren't in the way that questions are quiet when the person asking already suspects the answer and needs it confirmed. Since the 2nd week, Kang said. She looked at him for a long moment. You prepared for this from the 2nd week. I prepared for several possible versions of it, he said. I hoped I wouldn't need the worst one. Another silence. Longer. The screens behind Kang showed the Vel Karath fleet holding position, weapons cold, waiting. The battle was over. The capital was intact. The Empire had not fallen. Viel looked at the room. The small, undignified room with its 4 screens and its single chair pulled to the center, and something in her face moved in a way that was hard to name. Not shame exactly, something more honest than shame, recognition. She had stood in her great council chamber, in front of her generals and her nobles, and called this man her pet. He had come to this room and quietly saved her empire with a notebook and a communicator. She did not say anything else. She turned and walked back into the corridor. Kang watched her go. Then he turned back to the screen and began writing the after-action data into his notebook, line by line, in his small, steady handwriting, because there were still things that needed to be recorded while they were fresh. The room was very quiet. Outside, the stars above Vilos Prime were clear. The days after the battle were strange. The Empire was alive. The capital was intact. In the Velkarath fleet was withdrawing to its staging positions in deep space, and every Sorath sensor network was watching it go, with the careful attention of people who had just learned that a threat they had dismissed was real. The losses from the first strikes would take years to fully recover from. 3 systems were still dark. The first and second border fleets were gone. The human cost was enormous and would remain enormous for a long time. But Vilos Prime stood. And anyone who understood the stakes of this campaign understood that without what had happened in that small, unglamorous, secondary command room, it would not have. The palace was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that follows loud things. Not peace, but its neighbor. People moved carefully and spoke in lower voices. In the main command center, Tova's staff processed after-action data and did not speak her name without care. In the council chambers, the ministers sat in front of reports and read them more slowly than normal, because several things in the reports made no sense until you understood what Kang had done, and understanding it took time. Tova herself had not yet returned to the main council floor. Kang had heard through Rin that she had submitted a formal review request on her own command decisions. She had not been asked to. She had asked herself. It was, Rin said, the closest thing to an honest acknowledgement that a Sorath general of her rank was able to make. It did not fix what she had done, but it meant something. Kang thought about it for a moment. Then he put it aside. He had enough to think about. 3 days after the battle, the council sent a formal request. It came through the proper channels in the proper language, with the proper ceremonial phrasing. When it requested that Kang be given a formal advisory role in Imperial defense, specifically in strategic threat assessment and tactical planning. The role had a title, an office, access to classified intelligence networks, and a seat at the main council table. A real seat, not the observer's position, set back from the edge. Kang read the request twice. Then he set it on his desk and looked at his notebook for a while. He thought about the first day, the ceremony hall, and the sound of Sorath fists striking chest plates with the same weight they gave the weather. The low sound of laughter from Tova's direction that had moved through the crowd like a wave. He thought about 11 years of work that officially did not exist. He thought about what his brother Dai had said once, a long time ago, over a meal on Earth. The best outcomes are the ones that nobody saw coming, because those are the ones nobody was trying to stop. He picked up a pen, and he wrote one word at the bottom of the request, accepted. Una filed her official report to the Confederation 3 days after the battle. She sat at her desk in the embassy with a cup of cold tea she had forgotten to drink and wrote the report in the flat, structured language that official reports require. She detailed the events, the timeline, the outcomes. She cited sources. She attached the communication logs, the sensor data, the after-action summary from General Ova's fleet. Her official summary line read, "Asset performed within expected parameters." She looked at that line for a moment. Then in the personal notation section that went only to her own records and would never appear in a formal document, she wrote, "They always underestimate the quiet ones. They always will. And they will always be wrong." She closed the file. She picked up her tea. It was cold. She drank it anyway. Then she opened a new message to Kang and wrote, "You owe me dinner. And I've been worried for 3 months." His reply came back in under 2 minutes. "Name the day." She smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in 4 days. Admiral Day's ship stayed at the outer boundary for 48 hours after the battle, then withdrew to standard Confederation patrol routes as requested. Before leaving, Day sent one message to Kang through the secure channel. It read, "Fleet accounted for. No casualties. Good work. Also, Mother wants to know if you're eating." Kang read the message twice. The second time, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one. He wrote back, "Tell her yes. Tell her I'll call when things settle." He looked at the message for a moment after he sent it. He thought about home. Not the word, but the actual feeling it pointed to. The specific weight of it. It had been a long time since he had let himself think about it directly. He closed the channel and went back to work. Curveil came to him on the fourth evening. She came alone without guards, which was unusual. She came to the small palace garden, the one Kang walked every morning, at the hour when it was empty. He was already there, at the end of his usual path, standing at the low wall that looked out over the city. The sky was deep and dark and very clear, the stars close and cold above the city's glow. She stopped a few feet away from him. She looked out at the city. For a while, neither of them said anything. The Sarath were not built for apology. Their culture had evolved around strength in a way that made vulnerability feel like exposure, and exposure feel like danger. Viel had held power for over 20 years. She had not held it by showing the soft parts of herself to anyone. But she had also, in 20 years, made exactly one mistake that had cost her nothing and taught her nothing. Wes, she had never stood in front of her own council and called the wrong person by the wrong name at the wrong moment. She had done that. She was going to have to carry it. "I was wrong," she said. Her voice was even. It was not easy even. It was the kind of even that requires effort. She kept her eyes on the city. "I knew what you were before I said it," she continued. "Not the details. But I knew you were not what I called you. And I said it anyway because the council was watching and the frontier was burning, and I needed them to see strength, not uncertainty." She paused. "That is an explanation. It is not an excuse." Kang looked at the city for a moment. "I know," he said. "I am not practiced at this," she said. "I know that too," he said. Another silence. Longer. The city hummed quietly below them. A transport moved across the sky in the far distance, lights blinking slow and steady. "Yet you didn't do it for recognition," she said. It was not a question. She had been thinking about it for 4 days, and she had arrived at an answer, and she needed to say it out loud to know if it was right. "No," he said. "Then why?" He thought about how to answer that. He thought about the 11 years that didn't officially exist. He thought about the 6 deployments and the specific, undramatic reason he had always been willing to do that work. Not for glory, not for his country in the abstract, but for the smaller, more specific reason that he was good at it and it was needed. And those two things together had always felt like enough. "Because I made a commitment," he said, "and I take those seriously." He paused. "Because I was here," he said, "and I could." Val was quiet for a long time. Then she moved. One small step. She came to stand beside him at the wall. Not one step behind, not one step above. Beside. The same level. Looking at the same city under the same sky. It was a small thing. Physically, it was almost nothing. But for her, he understood, it was not nothing at all. They stood there for a while without speaking. The stars were very bright above the city. Far out in the dark, past the edges of the Sorath Empire, past the shattered remnants of the Vel-Kareth staging fleet, a command vessel moved quietly through space. Inside its operations room, a communications officer handed a data pad to the senior intelligence coordinator. On it was a file, compiled in the past 72 hours from every sensor reading, every intercepted signal, every data point that the Vel-Karath network had gathered during the battle. The file described a single human male, his movements, his communications, the outcomes that had followed each of his decisions. The intelligence coordinator read it twice. Then she looked up at the officer. "Wait, where did he come from?" she asked. "The Human Confederation," the officer said. "He's a diplomatic consort. He has no official military rank." The coordinator looked back at the file. She read one section again, then another. "Reclassify him," she said. She set the pad down carefully, the way one sets down something that has become more significant than expected. "Priority 1, full threat assessment, all assets." The officer nodded and moved away. The coordinator sat for a moment longer. She looked at the data. She looked at the outcomes. She thought about the ghost grid built from nothing. She thought about a fleet that should have been destroyed sitting intact at the inner boundary. She thought about the way the entire shape of the battle had changed quietly and without announcement from a single room inside the enemy's own palace. She thought about the word consort. She closed the file. All assets, she said again, quietly, to no one in particular. And in the palace on Vilos Prime, standing at a garden wall under clear and open stars, Kang stood beside a queen who had learned what he was, and both of them looked out at the same dark sky. The one that held, somewhere in its far reaches, the things that were already quietly looking back.